Hello, this is Josh Lee, and welcome back to the React on Ruby on Rails on AWS tutorial, where we use React, Ruby on Rails, and AWS to build a full stack application. The application is similar to something like Reddit.com. In our last video, we set up the server and we created some endpoints for our post resource. In this video, we're going to do some setting up for our client. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. So I'm in my folder here with my server. And so I am going to create a new React project using Vite. The command is going to be npm create Vite at latest. And we're going to call this Reddit clone client. So it's going to give us some options here. We're going to use React since this is in fact the React on Ruby on Rails on AWS tutorial series. So we have a couple options. The main options are if we want to use TypeScript or JavaScript. Now, if you've never used TypeScript before, it can seem kind of overwhelming, but it's not as confusing or complicated as it looks. And using TypeScript will actually help you when you start working with bigger projects and working with larger teams. So we're going to use TypeScript plus React compiler. If you want to use JavaScript, that's fine, but I recommend that you use TypeScript since I'm going to walk you through on how to use that in this application. And we'll be very gentle and we'll have a good time with TypeScript. We're going to hit no here. Install with npm and start now. Let's go ahead and say yes here. We're going to let it install with npm. All right, now I'm not going to run this server. I'm going to go ahead and close this here. I'm going to go and open up VS Code, a new window in VS Code. And I'm going to open up the repo or going to open up what we just created here. Just go to open. This is in documents, repos. We have our client right here. Let's open this here. Yes. Now what we're going to do is we're going to come over here to our terminal, and we're going to open our terminal here. And so we're going to be using the terminal and VS Code here. So as much as I like our Final Fantasy terminal, we're going to be using the terminal in here. Let's make this a little bit bigger. That might be a little too big. There we go. All right. Now to run our React application, we can go over here to our package.json. And if we see our scripts right here, if we use run, npm run, and then any of these here, we'll run one of those scripts. So for example, we can do npm run dev. And this is going to run the script right here. So let's go ahead and run that. And we're at localhost 5174. Let's open that up. And we have our Vite and React application here. Now the first thing I want to do is get rid of some of this CSS because we're going to install Tailwind and DaisyUI. This is what we're doing next. So first what I want to do is get rid of some of this CSS. So we're going to go to source, index CSS. We're going to exit all of this here. Go to app CSS. So we're going to close all this here too as well. Reason we're doing that now is so when we do install Tailwind and DaisyUI, we can immediately see the changes in them. So I'm going to go to the Tailwind website. And I'm just basically going to follow the directions. So the Tailwind website is here. This is docs installation using Vite. This is just go to the home page here. We're going to say get started using Vite right here. Okay. So we need to install, we already have Vite. We've already created our project. Now we need to install Tailwind and Tailwind CSS Vite. Let's open up a new terminal window here. We're just going to paste this command in here. And that is going to install Tailwind for us. We also have to go to our configuration. So if we go to Vite configuration here, we need to import Tailwind CSS from Tailwind CSS Vite. We're going to add this in a plugin. As you can see, this plugin here, just an array of plugins. We have React, and now we're just going to add Tailwind CSS, just like that. Okay. And now we're going to go to our main CSS file, app.css. We're going to import this here. Let's copy this. Let's paste this here. Let's save this. Let's go back to here. And let's go ahead and stop our application and restart it. npm run dev. Let's restart it here. All right. And let's go here to our app.tsx. So we have our CSS here. Let's go ahead and remove some of this here. And we can see here, we can just test this with a hello world here. Let's paste this. We're going to save. And let's look at here. We have hello world, see how it's underlined. Now for React, we're going to use JSX or TSX. And what this is, it's very similar to HTML, but technically it's JavaScript. And JavaScript uses the word class. It's a reserved word, so we have to use the word class name. Okay. So Tailwind is an easy way to style your components with inline class names here instead of creating separate CSS files. Now, if you do not know CSS already, I highly recommend you not using Tailwind CSS and doing the CSS by hand, because that will help you just to write the CSS by hand. So for example, you would come over app CSS, we would come over and say, this is an H1. Delete this here. So if we wanted to use CSS instead, you'd say, go over here. And this had H1, and we had font weight, about 800 or so. Text decoration, underline. Similar to that. I highly recommend doing this instead of just using Tailwind CSS. But since this is not a CSS tutorial, we're going to be using Tailwind. And we're also going to be using something called DaisyUI. DaisyUI is a component library for Tailwind CSS. So if we use Tailwind here, we have to use a bunch of class names like this, for example. Let's copy this here. So if we're using Tailwind, we have to have a lot of class names like this. And we'd be writing a whole lot of class names and looking at the documentation on what the syntax is. So instead, we're going to use DaisyUI. DaisyUI is a component library, so instead of writing classes like this, we may only write one class. And let me show you here. So I'm going to go to how to use here. So we need to install this with npm. So I'm just going to copy this here. Actually, let's go to Vite here. Yeah, this is fine. So let's stop this. We're going to install this. And then we also need to go to our app CSS. Copy this here. And we're also going to import DaisyUI. Make sure this comes after Tailwind, because Tailwind is a dependency for DaisyUI. And so what this will allow us to do is we can come over here to the main page here, to components. Just click components here. Okay, so now we're at components. And so, for example, we can find a bunch of these. If we want a hero section, for example, we can click here. This will be the hero section. You can see the HTML here, but we're using JSX. So we're going to be using JSX. So I'll be copying and pasting a lot of these components just to speed this up. But again, I highly recommend, if you don't already know CSS, to do this by hand. So I'm going to copy this here. We're going to go to our app, TSX, paste this in here. Okay. Save this here. Let's go ahead and restart our server. npm run dev. And now we have this here. Now this right here is from this code here. Now if you're seeing something different than me, for example, you don't have the black here, that's because it's using my system settings and using a dark background or dark theme. So if I come over here to my computer and say to my system settings, and I change my appearance to dark or light, this should change how this works here. Yeah, I think my browser is using dark settings. But if you see it light like this here, it's because you're using light mode versus dark mode. Okay? So we have this set up here. Now we want to create some pages, because a one-page application doesn't sound very exciting. So most of the code we write is going to be in source. So we're going to come over here to source, and we're going to write a folder, make a folder called pages. I like to make a directory called home. This is going to be the top level pages like home, about, things like that. So we're going to say home.tsx. And let's create a home component. So in newer versions of React, you don't need to import React from React. You no longer need to do this on newer versions. If you're on an older version, you may need to import that. All right, we can go here and say const home. I'm going to say return. And we're just going to say an h1. We're going to say this is the home page. All right, and we're going to close that here. Now, you need to export this file. You can do it this way, export default home. However, I suggest you use a named export. There are performance reasons to use named exports, and also developer experience reasons. So we're just going to use named exports. So we're going to say export const home. And if this is your first time writing any of this code here, I highly suggest you write it out by hand. So for example, I'm going to come over here and create a new file and say about. I highly suggest this needs to be in pages. It needs to be in home. There we go. I highly suggest to write this by hand. So you go export const about return h1. This is the about page. And I even suggest that I'm using GitHub Copilot here, which is doing some code completion for me. If this is your first time using React or first time using any technology, I highly suggest you don't do that. And only start using the AI tools and completions when you already know what to do. Otherwise, you're not going to learn it. And then when you run into problems, it's going to be very difficult for you to debug things. So we have some pages. Next, we need to figure out how we can get to those pages with our application. And to do that, we use something called a router. So we're going to come over here to source. We're going to create a new file. We're going to call this routes. Routes.tsx. And as you can see, we're still using plain looking JavaScript right here. No types yet, but when we start passing parameters and props and things like that, we will start using types. So routes.tsx, I'm going to import routes from React Router DOM. So we need to install this. So let's come over here. Let's shut down our server. Let's npm install React Router DOM. Okay. I'm going to have a comment here for our pages. Export const app routes. And the way the router works is you have a return like a React component, and then you wrap it with routes. Okay, and then for each route that you want, you're going to add the path to the route and the component that it will render. So we want home and about, so let's go ahead and bring those in. Import home from pages home, import about from pages about, and that actually is home. It's in the same directory. So we could have named this / or root or anything like that, which root actually might be a better name for this, but home is okay for now. We want to write some routes, so we want to have route, we're going to say path. This is our root path here, and of course that's going to send us to our home page. So this is just saying that the path that we're going to put in the URL and what we're going to render here. And so we're going to do the same for about. We're going to say route path about element about. Okay. So let's save this and let's test our routes now. So let's start our server again, npm run dev. If we go to our main page here, we should have our home page, but we don't have our home page because we have not set up our router yet. Right now we have just declared our routes, but we actually have to add them to our application. Okay, so we're going to come over here to our app.tsx, and we don't need React logo, we don't need the Vite logo, and we don't need this here. We don't need any of this here. And this is just going to hold import app routes from routes. Let's see here, app routes. So I spelled that wrong in my routes folder, or routes. So let's go back to routes, app routes. There we go. Save this. Let's come back to our application. We have our app routes here, and we're just going to render the app routes component here. Okay, let's see here. All right. We're still not done yet. Next, we need to go to our main file. So in order for React Router to work, we need to create it with import React DOM from React DOM, React router DOM. Oops. Let's see here. We also need the browser router. Imports. I'm going to say browser router from React router. This is React DOM clients, actually. React DOM client. React DOM clients. This is React. Just give me one moment. Create root. React DOM is from React DOM client. Oh, this should be React DOM. Here we go. React DOM. Okay. And then we have a browser router. BRW browser router from React router DOM. And here, instead of just the regular create root, we're going to use React DOM create root. And then we're going to wrap our app around our browser router. Browser router. I'm going to save this here. And now if we go to our root page, we see this is the home page. And we go over here and we can see this is the about page of the about page. So now our router is hooked up. Next, what we're going to do is we probably need some kind of way to navigate this application instead of having to go through our URL. So let's go through to DaisyUI. Let's go to components, and I'm just going to Control F for NAV. We have navbar right here. Let's copy this here. And any of these nav bars work fine. I like this one for our usage right here. So let's create a nav bar. We're going to go to source, we're going to go to folder, and we're going to create shared. And these are going to be components that are shared throughout the application. So we need a folder for navbar. And we'll call this navbar.tsx. And we're just going to copy and paste that over here. So we're going to say export const navbar. I'm going to say return. I'm going to paste that in just like that. All right, save that. Now in our pages, let's go to our home page. Let's go back to our home page here, and let's go over here and import that navbar. Import navbar from shared navbar. Okay. Now in React or JSX, you have to return one parent element. So I cannot do this. I can't do this because we have a element here and an element here. It can only return one. So we could do two things. We can use div here and return one here. And that's fine. Or we can return, if we do not want a div for some reason, we can just return this here. This is called a fragment in React. It's basically just an empty container. And this needs to be in brackets here. Save this here, and now we have our navbar here. Let's go ahead in our navbar. Let's go back to our navbar here in shared navbar. And in React, we can't have regular A tags like this for our links. Because the way React works is if you go to your React application through the URL like this, the whole application reloads. And so what we want to do is we want to navigate between different pages of our application without making a new request. So when you enter a URL here and you hit enter, you're going to get you're sending a GET request for this page. We don't want to do that. we want to change what is here in the UI without sending a whole GET request for a new page. What that allows us to do is change our page without refreshing our page, and change our page with just changing one element, for example, for instead of the whole entire application. And to do that, that's why we use React Router. So to use React Router, we can't use regular links. What we have to use is import link from React Router DOM. We're going to come over here, and instead of, we have, let's see here, DaisyUI here. What we want to do is we want to link that to our home page. So we can say link to. We can pass these same exact class names through here too. Button, button ghost, text extra large. We're going to close that link here. And we're just going to say Reddit clone. Let's delete that. And for this item here, let's link this to our about page. So let's go here. We're just going to say link to about, and then the anchor text about, and then close that. All right, let's save this here. Now we can navigate to, we're at our home page. We can click here, go back to our home page. We can go to our about page, but we don't have the header on our about page. So if we go to about page here, pages about, we don't have the header like we do in home. So we could come over here, we could copy this, we could import this nav bar here. We can do this and then add the nav bar just like this. But that is retyping code and redoing code. We want to dry up our code. So if we do have to change our nav bar at any time or change this, we only need to change it at one place. And it really doesn't make sense to be putting this on every page if we know we want it to be on every page. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this here. For now, we're just going to get rid of our nav bar. Save this here. And so if we go back to our home page, we no longer have a nav bar. What we're going to do is we're going to set up a layout. I'm going to come over here to source, new folder. We're going to call this layouts. I'm going to call this main layout. Main layout and main layout. I can imagine we might have a main layout and then maybe a moderator layout and then maybe a super admin layout. So right now we just have our main layout. And so we want our nav bar here, import, let's get our nav bar. Nav bar from, that should be in shared, nav bar. Export const main layout. Main layout. I'm going to say here. And we're going to say our nav bar. We got our nav bar right here. And let's say we want to render our things in here. So how this works is it's very similar to how children work in a React component. So you might do something like children here and then children here, something like that. But with a layout like this, we're going to use something called outlet. So import outlet from React Router DOM. And that essentially does the same thing, but it's for routes specifically. So go to, let's say main outlet here. Okay. This means all the content we put is going to be wrapped in a main wrapper. So now we need to change our routes. So let's go back to our routes here. tsx, and we're going to import that layout that we just did. Let's see here. Export constant main layout. Okay. Export main layout from layout to main layout. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go here, and instead of just this home element, we're going to go ahead and put our main layout here, main layout. And we're not going to close this. We're going to open this up. Open this up here, and then we're going to put our other elements, our other routes inside of there. So now we have our index element, like we just had before. And we do our about. And we don't need this slash here because we already have the slash here. And so this is how we can do our nested routes here. So we have our namespace here over slash, and this is the index, which means that it's the index for the slash. And then if we do slash about, we'll go to our about page. So let's save this here. So now we have our header here, or nav bar here. We have this is the home page. And if we click over here and look at inspect, we can see that our content is wrapped around main here. If we go to our pages, home, see it's just a fragment here, but this gets injected into our layout right here, and this wraps everything around main. And that way, when we're styling things, we can style under main. What I like to do as well is I like to make this div here and class name. I like to name this home page, and then page. And then if I write CSS or SCSS later, I can just write everything under the home page for this here. I don't have to change anything else. Right now, we're not writing any CSS, so I wouldn't worry about that at the moment. But let's still keep this as a div around there, like so. Because we have to have some kind of component, one element that we return this. We can't just return multiple elements. We have to return one main one. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to install Prettier. And what Prettier does is Prettier allows us to automatically format our code to make it look nice and make it format to a standard. So if you're working with a lot of different people on a team, you can use something like Prettier or ESLint, which makes all of your code basically follow the same style guide. To do that here, we're going to stop our server. We're going to say npm install d Prettier. Now that we've installed Prettier, we're going to create some configuration files for it. In the root of our application, we're going to create a file called Prettier, P-R-E-T-T-I-E-R-R-C. And that's just going to be a JSON file. I'm just going to copy and paste this. These are just different style guides you can have. So for example, we only want single quotes. So instead of having quotes like this, we'll have single. We're going to put semicolons on each end of the line. And this is basically the settings. What we're also going to do is we're going to create an ignore file. So let's go here. This is going to be .prettier ignore. And we're going to add some files here. And what this is going to do is when we run Prettier, it's going to ignore these directories. So distribution, we don't want to run Prettier when we're doing our build. We don't want to do our node modules because we don't want to mess with other people's code that they've written. And these are just directories we do not want to run Prettier on. So let's go to our package.json file. And now we're going to create a script to run Prettier. And to do that, we're going to call this script format. This is a Prettier write. And we're going to say here, that's going to write our whole project. So if we come over here, let's save this. If we come over here to, let's say, our routes file, let's say our routes file. Let's say we forgot to have some of these here, and maybe we use double quotes here. Save this. What we can do, I'm going to clear this out so it's easier to see. npm run format. And if you noticed, what that did was it added the colon here and changed this to a single space. So I'm going to Control Z, and you can see this is what it was before. You can see these changes. Control Shift Z, and this is what it changes here. It's going to make sure all of our code stays nice there. Now what we want to do is we don't want to have to run that command all the time. So we're going to set up VS Code where it does it when we save the file. So let's go find our settings. All right, so let's go to our settings. We're going to come over here to Code, Settings, Profile. These are some settings I had before when we did some settings I had before. I'll come over here. We're just going to copy some configuration I found. Let's save that. We need a comma. Here we go. All right. Let's exit this here. Let's exit all these windows. Before we can get Prettier working on save, we're going to have to install the Prettier extension. So I'm doing Control Shift P or Command Shift P extensions. And let's try to find Prettier here. Let's install this here. Trust install. Okay, now that we have installed Prettier, now that should work fine. Control S, and we can see that now when we save our files, Prettier runs and formats our files to how we want them. And that's it for today's lesson. Next time, we're going to add a little bit more onto the client, and then we could connect the client with our Rails server. If you'd like to see more of this series, make sure to like and subscribe and ring the notification bell so you see when more of these come out. And I'll see you next time.